All right, here we go. I hope everybody's settled in and ready for another fun episode of building a Star Wars database Alexa skill. So that's what we've been working on. If you haven't had an opportunity to see the previous two episodes, what we have done is I'm going to walk you through kind of what we have so far. And then the idea now is that we're going to take a lot of the responses that a user would give us, and we're going to actually be able to take some action on that. So if someone asks us about Han Solo, we should be able to recognize what they said, and then also be able to go retrieve the record from a database that's appropriate for what the user said, and bring that back to our skill and respond to the user with more information. So if they ask about Han Solo, we should be able to tell them all about Han Solo in whatever text we have in our database. So that's the intention for today. So let's just get started on kind of demonstrating what we have so far. So one of the things that we started with was a few intents. We have a person intent, as you can see here. We have a droid intent, a vehicle intent, a location intent, and a weapon intent. And the idea with each of these intents is that this is what a user will be asking about. They might ask us about a vehicle, or they might ask us about a location like a planet like Alderaan. But they also might ask us about a person or a droid like R2-D2. And so we want to be able to customize and craft our responses based on the kinds of things that the user said. And so we've broken it into these 5 categories. You'll notice as we go through these, if I look at person intent, that I really have the same kinds of utterances in every one of these. You can see that I have about person, tell me about person, who is person, and just the person's name. And then there's a slot sitting behind this, which I've also called person. The same goes for droid, though. I have the same idea here. About droid, this would be ask unofficial Star Wars about droid. Who is, what is the name of the droid, and tell me about. And for vehicle, I was going to come in here and add that about to each one of these. About vehicle. So we'll just add another intent to each one of these, just to cover off on that situation where you might just ask the skill directly about something. About location, and finally about a weapon. And we'll go through, because I promised last week that I would add some data to this so that we weren't just sitting here watching me do data entry. So I've gone ahead and added some data to each of our slot types. So we'll start there. We can come into person, and you'll now see I think I have about 31 values now that are in my slot. And you can see that I've got Qui-Gon and Watto, if you remember him from episode 1, Rey, who we still don't know her last name, Mace, Yoda, lots and lots of different characters in my list. And it goes on. There's about 10 more down here at the bottom. Newt Gunray, Salacious B. Crumb, if you guys remember that character. And in each of these, we have a couple of values that have synonyms, right? So when it makes sense, like I might add for Chewbacca, I might add Chewie, because if someone were to say, tell me about Chewie, this skill wouldn't know what to do with Chewie because I don't have that synonym. But by adding that, it makes it pretty easy to catch those extra kind of things. In the same way that someone might ask about Luke or Akbar or Poe, or one of these variations on Leia's name, right? And I think I have a couple more up here. People might ask about Han or Jar Jar without actually saying Jar Jar Binks, which is what our slot value is. Now, I know most of us would say, why would you ever ask about Jar Jar? But he's still a character, and it's something that we should acknowledge. So the same goes for Lando. Kylo Ren, if you ask about Ben Solo, which is his given name, then it seems like I should probably give you the same response. Since we don't really know much about Kylo before he turned into Kylo, we don't have a lot else to share, but we can at least acknowledge that if you say Ben Solo, that, hey, you asked me about Ben Solo, here's what I'm going to tell you about Kylo Ren. So that's the whole point of these synonyms and values. In here, you can see I have a bunch of droid names, and I've modified a few of them with synonyms as well. Sometimes he's called 3PO instead of C3PO, same with R2. And then K2SO. I wasn't sure exactly how the pronunciations were going to work, so I just added a couple of variants in here where I actually spell out K2SO and K2SO. In case that Alexa might translate it one way or the other, we still catch all of them. So these are my droids. I also have in here some vehicles. So the Y-Wing, the TIE Fighter. I only did a few. Ultimately, we could have hundreds and hundreds in this list. But for now, this is what I've started with. Just a few base values. And you'll notice that things like the Tantive 4, if you guys don't know the Tantive 4, that's the ship that is captured at the very beginning of Episode 4, or I guess right at the end of Rogue One. It's the ship that they're on that has the rebel plans. It's where we first see Darth Vader in Episode 4. So the Tantive 4 is spelled this way, IV, but I actually want to have a synonym that has the number in it as well. That's always important. I did the same thing here with Slave 1, so you can see that I have the name spelled out. That's Boba Fett's ship, if you didn't know that one. And then down here for location, you can see that I have a bunch of different planets. I've done the same thing with Yavin 4 here. Also with Death Star 2, I was never really sure what they called the second Death Star, but on all the Star Wars websites, including the official Star Wars website, it is referred to as Death Star 2, although they never call it that in any of the films. So I have it called Death Star 2 here. I also have the original Death Star, Hoth, Coruscant, Tatooine. So again, some locations. And then finally we have some weapons. And I just pulled a few into here. Most of them you're probably familiar with. Kylo Ren's lightsaber, thermal detonators, a big player in Return of the Jedi. The ion cannons are what helped them escape Hoth in Episode 5. But there's a couple in here that you may not have seen. The electro chain whip and the electro chain whip, that was in the most recent episode from the troopers that are guarding Supreme Leader Snoke. So I thought that was a cool one to include. And then also the Z6 Riot Control Baton. That's the kind of like lightsaber-based swinging arm thing that Finn fights against the Stormtrooper with in front of Maz's castle in Episode 7. So again, lots and lots of weapons out there, and we could have included many more. I also included just a base entry for lightsaber and things like blaster pistol and blaster rifle, and you'll see those as we get into our data. So that's the core of the skill, and I'll jump into the Lambda here in a second just to show you what that looks like. So let me save this since I made a few changes, and I'll build it. And that will take a second. So while that's building, we can come over here and look at the Lambda function. So up here at the very top of my Lambda, you can see that I have all of my handlers, right? So I have a launch request. That's when I just open the skill, and I'll demonstrate a couple of these for you also as we get into this. The first is the launch request. I'll just open it, and the invocation name for my unpublished skill right now is Unofficial Star Wars. So I'll start with that. Alexa, open Unofficial Star Wars. Alexa, open Unofficial Star Wars.
I am AL3XA, Human-Cyborg Relations. What can I help you with?
Stop.
Goodbye.
So you can see that she's just saying, I am AL3XA, Human-Cyborg Relations. And if I had waited, she would have said, I'm fluent in more than 6 million languages. I'm just copying off of C-3PO, but it's a fun thing to have the skill say. Makes you feel a little bit more like this isn't just a database, but it's a little more interactive. For these others, person, location, weapon, droid, and vehicle, for each of these, all I'm doing is recognizing what you said. I don't have any idea really at this point the words, like our code doesn't actually look at what you said or how we got it, but instead, in this case, it will be able to compare against the slot values and say, oh, you said a person or you said a weapon. So let me demonstrate a couple of those, and then we'll get into really modifying this to take advantage of some richer data. Alexa, ask Unofficial Star Wars about Han Solo.
You asked me for a person.
So you can
What
see
do you want to know?
Alderaan.
You asked me for a location. What can I tell you about the Star Wars universe?
Blaster rifle.
You asked me for a weapon. What do you want to know?
K2SO.
You asked me for a droid. What can I help you with?
Millennium Falcon.
You asked me for a vehicle. What can I help you with?
Stop.
Goodbye.
So that's not obviously a great experience at this point. We haven't built anything that gives the user any real answers or responses. So our goal today is to actually provide a lot of those responses. So for those of you that followed along last week, and I'll reintroduce this a little bit, I am using an external service. This is an independent company called Airtable, and they make a really great set of tools for the kinds of things that I generally build skills around. Something like this database or like the DevTips skill that you may have seen. So for the Star Wars database that I'm building, if I open up one of these, they call them a base. So think of it like a database. But what it really is an interactive spreadsheet style interface that allows me to add, create, and interact with my data. So it's not just a spreadsheet. It does have an API sitting behind it, and we'll get into all of that. But it makes it very easy for me to pull a bunch of data out. And so you can see that I've constructed a bunch of data for my people, right, for my person table. And so in here I have all of the names that I currently support. These are all the same list of names that you would see in the slot values in my skill. And then in here I have a couple of additional things. I have an image. So as we get into this a little bit further, we're gonna touch on doing things on screens, like the Echo Show and the Echo Spot, and also cards, which you can make appear on the Fire TV, and also the Echo Show and Echo Spot, as well as in the Alexa app. We'll get into building all of that stuff later, but it's good to know that we at least have an image of each of these characters. And if I were to tap open Luke Skywalker here, you can see that I have a photo of his face. So for each of these, I have a photo of some kind. If we open up Darth Maul, for example, each one of these is meant to just be a representative picture that shows you what the character looks like. And so there's a photo of Darth Maul. Okay, so we have the basics. We also have in here a voice description, a card description, and a screen description. Now, the reason that I've broken these out, and I don't think that everyone always does this, but the reason that I do this is there's a very specific way I'm going to want Alexa to say the words back to the user. And it might require some formatting, it might require some SSML to mark things up or tweak things a little bit. But I wouldn't want that SSML to be displayed on a screen or in a card. And so I keep them separate for that purpose. So on a card, which again we see on like the Fire TV or the Alexa app, all of the text will be displayed as a card on the user's device. However, when you do things like line breaks, because you have very limited control over the kinds of formatting you can do, but in that limited control, you have the ability to add line breaks, but you do it with a /n as a new line indicator. But on the screen description, something you would build for the Echo Show or the Echo Spot, it uses something more like HTML, and so because of that, you need to use line breaks, open brackets /br kind of scenario. So in each of these, there's slightly different formatting required, there's slightly different text, or maybe you want to make it shorter on screen than what Alexa actually reads. You have that power when you break these apart. I will tell you that for now, all of them are exactly the same. I haven't gone through and formatted them for each of those, but as we get into cards and screen, I will certainly do that. Today, we're not going to use these values, though. You can see that I also have an affiliation when it's appropriate, as to whether they're Rebel Alliance or the Trade Federation or Galactic Empire. I also have their home world, if I was able to determine that. And I wasn't always able to determine that. So I didn't do a ton of research. I didn't spend hours and hours trying to create this table. So if I could find it easily, I did. But I'm sure we could fill these values in eventually. And then I also have species. So if they're human, which a good majority of the characters in Star Wars are, then it's easy to put human. But for those that aren't, like Admiral Akbar, then I can mark his species as Mon Calamari. So those are the initial values that I had to kind of hunt down. The rest of these here, you see this giant grid of checkboxes. These checkboxes represent the places in which they have been shown. So as we go through these characters, you can see that Newt Gunray was in episodes 1, 2, and 3, but then wasn't seen again. You can see that Luke Skywalker was in episodes 3 through 9. And 3 is really pushing it because you just saw a baby for a brief second. But that's episode 3. He is included in that one. So 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. But he was obviously not in Rogue One or the new Solo movie that's coming out, and he hasn't been in Clone Wars or Star Wars Rebels. So these are all of the what do we consider the canon of Star Wars. And so because of that, I'm keeping track of where these people are available. This also gives me the power to be able to come back later and build additional features for my user. They could say, tell me about a character in episode 8, and I could just randomly jump into this database then and grab a character from episode 8 and tell them all about, hey, you know what, I picked, who do I have as an example for episode 8? General Hux. I picked General Hux for you. Here's some information about General Hux, right? And you'll see that this grid of check marks is applied across each of my tables. So I have person. I also have in here, if we go back, I have a droid table. So if I open up my droid table again, you're going to see the exact same kind of data, although there's less of it. I did more people than anything else. But you can see that I have a droid type, which is a new custom field for this one, what kind of droid they are. And then I also have, what properties they were in addition to those 3 descriptions, which you'll see consistently across these. So as we go into all this, and I'm going to spend a lot of my time on the person table because that's where we're going to write most of our code today, and then we'll just replicate that across the other 4. But if I open vehicle, I think that in here we have affiliation as well. So whether it's a Rebel vehicle or a Empire vehicle, something like that. So I have images for all of them again. So if you want to see those awesome ski speeders from episode 8, I have a picture of those, I think. Yeah. So you can see that that's what those ski speeders look like. It's when that red smoke came out of the salt or the snow. So in each of these cases, I have all of the things that they were included in as well. So you can see that those ski speeders were only in episode 8. Okay, so I think I've beaten this to death, and we'll come back to it as we're getting into our code. But for now, what I really want to do is start tweaking up my code. So initially, my launch request still works perfectly fine. I think the response that I have in here is acceptable. I am AL3XA, Human Cyborg Relations, how can I help you? Something like that. And that's the entire response I'm going to send. I don't know anything about what they want to do. All they said was open the skill. So the person intent is where I really want to start getting into this, because what I want to do is not only be able to recognize what the user said, but I want to know if they matched one of my slots. And then if they matched one of my slots, I want to go out to my database and I want to go get it. So over the next 40 minutes or so, that's what we're going to go through. And by the way, if you're watching this live, please feel free. There is a chat room on the right-hand side of the window. If you have questions or want clarification on something that I'm doing or working on, you're more than welcome to ask me questions there. I am monitoring that, and so I'll try to respond to your questions as we go through this. Okay, so let's get into our person intent. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to get rid of all this, because I don't need, that's not really of any value to me. It was good to let me understand how my slots were working and that I was falling into the right intents, but I don't need that anymore. So the first thing that I want to do is be able to get the value of the value that the user spoke into my slot. So if we recall, if I come over here and I look at my person intent, I have tell me about person, or who is person, or maybe they just said the name. And in each of these cases, I want to know what person was. What did they say? So if we're going to do that, the first thing that I need to do is go get that slot value. So the way I would normally do this, if you're just starting, is you would say var spoken value is the name I like to use, because this is differentiating. This is differentiating between the word the user spoke and potentially a slot that it matched. Again, if they say R2, that's not enough for me to match on my database. I need to know that they matched R2D2. So with R2D2, I would want to get that value as well. So you'll see as we get into this entity resolution stuff how this works. So for my var spoken value, I might do something like this .event .request .intent .slots .person .value. That is the path directly to my slot value inside my intent. And it is relatively safe to assume, that I will get a value every single, if I hit the person intent, I will always get my person slot. But I have built enough skills and played enough with this code to realize that sometimes you don't. Sometimes that slot won't even exist because the way that Alexa's interaction model funneled the user's words to, we landed in the person intent, but she didn't recognize a slot. And I wonder if I can try to accomplish that. Maybe if we have a little time at the end, I will go through and try to accomplish that, where I can get her to actually fall into the intent without actually providing a slot value. So anyway, so we have this person intent, and that's how I would normally grab it. But because there's a possibility that it wouldn't exist, and if it doesn't exist in the JSON, then this line would cause an error for me. So what I generally try to do is make this a little safer. And so I'm going to take this bit away here, and I'm going to just create a method called getSpokenValue. And I do something like this where I say this, and then I need to tell it where I'm looking. What's the name of the slot? So I'm going to say person. So what I'm doing is I'm passing the entirety of this, which is what we will work in normally. And since I have this and I'm passing it down, I'm also passing the name of the slot value that I want. So instead of typing this all out, I have it pre-typed, and I'm just going to bring this method over. This is something that lives in our Alexa cookbook. And so when you do stuff like this, you don't need to go type it either. You can just come into the Alexa cookbook, and the function looks something like this. Function gets spoken value. And what we do is we do an if statement, and we check at each level to see if the thing exists. If any of these resolve to undefined, then if will be false, and we won't try to return our value. Instead, we will return the value undefined. But if all of these exist, as we expect that they will, then we can return the actual slot value. And so that's the point of this function. So at this point now, if I come back up to my intent, I now have a value called spoken value that I can reliably count on to either return to me the the value undefined, or the actual spoken value that the Alexa skill received. Good start. The next thing that I need, and before I get into this, I'm going to show you guys my logs to show you what this stuff looks like. I have that sitting over here somewhere. Yeah, so let me come into my logs, and I'll show you kind of the stuff I'm logging and how this stuff works. So let's set an example that we can find pretty easily. I'm going to ask it about R2-D2, just so that we have that example sitting here. So Alexa, ask unofficial Star Wars about R2-D2. Alexa, ask unofficial Star Wars about R2.
You asked me for a droid. What can I tell you about the Star Wars universe?
Stop.
Goodbye.
Okay, so we now have, if I crack this open, we should now have an entry in my log where I set R2, and it responded to me with, so let's see what this event, oh, it's just the one that added down here. So if I open this up, what I should see, oh, that was the stop. So let's come to this one. So I'm logging every event in context as it happens so that it's easy to navigate back and see what happened. So this is my request. And you can see that I have this the event.request, .intent, .slots, .droid, .value. So if I was talking about a droid, as we talked about in our code that we saw here, let me come down to the bottom. This would have been slots, and I'm passing in the slot name so that I don't have to have a different function for each. But I'm doing slots.droid.value, and so if we look back here, you can see that I have slots.droid.value, and this is where I actually get the value R2 out of my JSON request. But there's this other piece down here, this resolutions, and this becomes really important because you can see that in here I have the value R2-D2. So there's a couple of things that I learned by going through this. The first is, if this code says ER success match, then it means that it is 100% confident that it matched something in one of my slot values. Or maybe 100% is overstating it, but it's really confident that it matched something that is one of my slot values. If this says ER success no match, that means it's really confident that it didn't match anything in my slot values, which is also really useful information as we're trying to make calls to a database or something like that. So this code is really useful to know, do I or do I not have any values that matched my user's request. And then down here, this list of values is the list of things that it thought it matched. So in the case of R2, it only matched R2-D2. Let me do one more here where I think Boba Fett and Jango Fett are both in my list on purpose. So if I say Fett, I think that will bring them both back. So let's give that a try. Alexa, ask unofficial Star Wars about Fett.
You asked me for a person. What can I help you with?
Okay, so let's see what that did.
You asked me for a droid. What can I tell you about the Star Wars universe?
Alexa, stop.
Goodbye.
Okay, so we'll get this all loaded up and make sure that we have everything in place. This is my stop intent. So let's go back one to this event. That's not the one I wanted either, because that was where she kept listening. So let's look at this one. This should be the one. Okay, so I said fat, or it thought I said fat, but in fact I said Fett. So that tells me a couple of things. One, when I say fet, it didn't recognize that I was talking about it. So let's address that problem first. So if I go into person, now I don't expect that people are just going to refer to these characters as fet, right? They would probably refer to them as Boba Fett or Jango Fett. But for the purposes of this skill, let's give this a try. So I'm going to do Fett as a synonym for Jango, and I'm also going to do it for, I thought I had Boba Fett down here. Yeah, I'm going to add Fett as a value for Boba Fett as well. And so let me just save this really quick and build it. And this will just take, ooh, that's not how I wanted this to go. Let me grab my JSON editor. And my session expired, if you see the error down there in the right-hand corner. So I'm going to copy this out. I'm going to refresh this page. And it's going to require me to log in again. This is a good save if you ever run into this, where it says your session has expired. I just go to the JSON editor, copy it, and then when you come back, you should be able to paste it back in, and that way you don't lose any changes. I've let this browser sit around for a while, so I think that's why my session has expired. That's not something that happened too often, but when it does, this is a good way to save it. And so I'm going to try refreshing this page one more time. I had this issue earlier today where it didn't think I was logged in. Okay, try this one more time. And once this page loads, I'll paste my JSON back and we'll save and build. Okay, so like that, and then hit save. And this time we're logged in, and now we can build. And the build has started. That's great. So again, this usually takes, you know, a minute, maybe 90 seconds. So as we're doing this, one of the other things that I probably should have done is add the word fat to their name if I was expecting people to say fet. Now, I don't really expect that people are going to say that, but if you think there's a chance, then it's a good idea to include those as synonyms for your values. But what I'm really trying to demonstrate here is that I can get more than one value in my resolutions values that are sitting down here. So let's see how we're doing. Still building. But ultimately what we're going to try to do is get not only the spoken value, but we're going to try and get the actual value, the match for what they had. And like I said, as we are over here, my build was successful. So let's try that fet one more time. I'll try to make sure I enunciate properly. Alexa, ask unofficial Star Wars about fet.
You asked me for a person. How can I be of assistance?
Stop.
Goodbye.
Okay, let's see what Alexa heard this time. So down here near the bottom, this should be the one. It heard a stop intent. That's not the one I wanted. So let's try this one. Nope, I'm not down far enough. Okay, so it still heard me say fat, which is unlucky. If I really want to catch this, I need to do fet, and then that was my stop. So let's do this one more time with my people, and in this case I have Jango, so I will add the word fat to him, and this is actually pretty funny because if you guys have ever played World of Warcraft. My character name when I played that a few years ago, for many years, was Boba Fett. I thought that was a pretty funny name, and so it's funny that it's coming back to play with me here. So I'm going to save that model, build it one more time, and while we're waiting for that, as long as you understand that we're going to have multiple values sitting in this entity resolution success, I think that's the point I was really trying to make, and we can come back into our code and I can do the second piece, which is what I'm going to call var resolved values, and I keep this plural because there of course is the possibility that there would be more than one. So I'll say get resolved values dot call, and this is where I'm going to pass in this in person again. so that I know what slot to look for, because each of these slots will have a different name. There's one called location and weapon, and on and on. So I need to create this method, and again, it looks very similar, but I'm doing this in a way that is safe from undefined if something is missing. So again, I have this function down here, and we will add a second function. Whoop. That is called getResolvedValues. And you can see in here that what I'm doing is the same thing. I'm looking all the way through all of the nodes that are necessary. If it exists, then I go ahead and return that, and I'm returning all of the values. Otherwise, I return undefined. So I've got these two methods, and they go and retrieve those values for me. But what I really want to do is then start doing something interesting with these. So in order to do something interesting, what I really need to do is check against my resolved values. Let's see if my build has finished, and it has. So let's try FET one more time. Now even FAT should get me where I want to be. Alexa, ask unofficial Star Wars about FET.
You asked me for a person. What can I tell you about the Star Wars universe?
Stop.
Goodbye.
Okay. So one last time. Sorry for hemming on this. I just wanted to show this as an example. Let's see if we have this one here. Okay, so you can see in this case it's still hearing FAT, which makes sense. FET is not a common word, and it's not something that I've offered her a lot of training to understand that it's the context of what we're looking for. But FAT resolves now, and so if someone were to say FAT, you can see that I would get ER success match, and then I would get two values. I would get Jango Fett and I would get Boba Fett because they both have that synonym attached to them. And so in this case, I wouldn't have any idea which one the user really meant. I would just know that there are two matches. So what I like to do in these situations where I do get multiple matches is push back to the user and say, hey, what's the story? Like, why, which one did you want, right? And I can then say, hey, I have Jango Fett and I have Boba Fett. Which one do you want? And at that point, when they say Boba Fett or they say Jango Fett, then we're going to get an ER success match of 1 because it should only match one or the other one. So it's a very, very nice system, and it kind of resolves its way down to one answer. Okay, so we've seen what that looks like. So let's come back to our code and write a little bit more. So the few things that I have in here that I really want is I need to determine what's going on with resolved values. Did I get 0 values, which means I had no match? Did I get 1 value, which means I have a perfect match and I should go get some answers for them? Or did I have multiple values and I need to clarify what the user really means? So I'm just going to do this with a simple if statement, and I'll say if resolved values, come on, undefined, like that, then go ahead and we'll just say not found. So I'm just doing this as a comment just to build out some structure. We'll come back and add some code to this. Else if resolved values, so I know it's defined now, right? Because it's gotten past the first part. So now I can say if the length is 1, which means I only have 1 record, then we're gonna do some stuff. And then else if resolved values dot length is greater than 1, then we need to do something. So this will be a clarify kind of situation. So these are the 3 scenarios that we have. This is what we're really building and working on. And so for not found, I can try and give the user some nudging. And so this is going to be a simple statement like we had like this. So I'm going to take this piece here and I'm going to say, I'll leave my comment. This response.speak. You asked me for a location, but I wasn't able to find a match for, and this is where I can pull in what they said. So what I should be able to do here is say spoken value. So the way this will read is you asked me for a location, but I wasn't able to find a match for FAT, if that was not something I had a match for. And then I would go ahead and add a question. If we talked about this last week, I have a function called getRandomQuestion that just has a list of 3 or 4 questions. So if you haven't seen that before, it's down here. It's what do you want to know, or how can I be of assistance, or what can I tell you about the Star Wars universe? So it's just going to randomly grab one of those questions for me. So that's what getRandomQuestion is. And then I'm going to add a listen, which is you asked me for a location, and I'm going to add this piece on here again. But I wasn't able to find a match for spoken value. You asked me for a location, but I wasn't able to find a match for spoken value. And then we'll ask another question here as well. So in each of those cases, for my speak and my listen, I'm basically letting the user know, like, hey, I wasn't able to find a match for what you said. And this is something that can continue to improve. So if I recognize that a lot of people are saying fat, then I realize what they're really trying to do is get to Boba Fett or Jango Fett, and that's where I would go in then. I would record these values in a database, or at least go through my logs. But there's a lot of great tools out there that you can collect a lot of this data for pretty easily. I would save this value, go through it later, and be like, wow, there's people saying this word, and I consistently am not matching on it, so I should do something with that. And so I could then add fat as a synonym, and then instantly when people say fat in the future, it would resolve to the appropriate things. So I've created a this.response.speak, and I'll do, just to bump this down, make it readable. I have this.speak, and then I've added .listen. So in each of these cases, we have the same sentence, same question, same everything, which is just perfect. So let me go ahead and save that, and we should be able to test that right away. So let's see. I'm gonna use the word Mickey Mouse just to see if it where that resolves and how this works out. So let's see how that goes. Alexa, ask unofficial Star Wars about Mickey Mouse.
There was a problem with the requested skills response.
Oh, we get to do some debugging today. Bonus content for you guys. So let's see what it thought was wrong with Mickey Mouse. So we'll wait for our log to load here. It didn't have an unhandled function. So what really happened here is that this is what I was expecting. It's a person intent. I gave it Mickey Mouse. I had no success. So I wonder why. I wonder why it failed automatically. That's interesting, because I got the ER success, no match, which is what I expected, because Mickey Mouse shouldn't be a match. And then I should have landed here, I would think. So my thought is that I'm doing something something to break it. Oh, and I know exactly what I'm doing wrong. So in here, you can see how I have these this.response.speak and listen, whatever. I don't have this. And what I was trying to do is be clever and add this at the end. So let me do that and see if we get the same response. Alexa, ask unofficial Star Wars about Mickey Mouse.
You asked me for a location, but I wasn't able to find a match for Mickey Mouse. What do you want to know?
Stop.
Goodbye.
Also, by testing this, no one called me out in the comments. Usually I get some good pair programmers with me here. You asked me for a person. I copied this from the location box and then didn't change it. So you asked me for a person, but I wasn't able to find a match for Mickey Mouse. And so she responded appropriately and said, hey, there's no value for Mickey Mouse in the list of data that I have. Perfect. That's exactly what I wanted. And then down here for clarify, this is another pretty easy one. So what we're going to do in this case is loop through the list of resolved values and basically do the same thing. But instead of saying I wasn't able to find, I'm going to say I found too many. So let me take this response here and we'll just add a little bit more to it. So here I have this.repeat. So you asked me about. So I'm just going to craft a sentence here. You asked me about spoken value, so we'll take this piece here. you asked me about, let's say, Fett. You asked me about Fett, and I found multiple answers. Would you like to know about, and in here what I'm going to do is create a variable. So what I'm going to do here is say var values, value string equals get resolved. No, I don't want to do get resolved values. Get values string. I should make this plural, values string. So this is going to be a string of values, and in here what I'm going to do is pass resolved values. Now I'm creating a brand new method, and actually I hadn't anticipated this one, so I'm going to just write this from scratch. So get value string is going to go down here at the bottom, so we'll come down into all of our other methods. I'll put it right after this one. Function get values string, and in here we'll have values. And all we're going to do is loop through it. So we're going to say for var I equals 0, I is less than values.length I plus. Okay, and so in my if statement here, all I'm going to do is create a string variable. So we'll do var string equals nothing, so that each time we come here it's initialized. And then I can say string plus equals, and we'll take values I, and it's actually going to be, make sure I get this right, values.value.name, because that's how we got to dig into this, value.name. So that will give me the string, but I also will want a comma to happen in here, and I'm also going to want an or for the last one. So there's a couple of little tricks I'll need here. So this gives me my name, but what I'm probably going to want to do is if I doesn't equal 0, then string plus equals comma space. So that'll put a comma after each additional one. And then I can also say if I equals values.length minus 1, which would be the last value. Did I do all my parentheses right there? Then string plus equals 4, like that. So I just hacked this together, and then we're going to return string. I think that will work. I didn't actually give prior thought to how that function was going to roll out, but we have get value string, and I think that will work. We'll find out in a moment. So in here, I have this value string, and I'm calling get value string, passing in my values. So I should be able to just say this, would you like to know about, and then in here I can say, would you like to know about Boba Fett or Jango Fett? Value string, and then I'll put a nice question mark on the end and a space, and then ask my, and then I don't actually want to ask my get random question because I've already asked them a question. So we can lose all of this and keep it like that. So would you like to know about this? And then for the follow-up, for the listen, the reprompt, I'm not going to do the whole thing. I'm just going to say the end part. Would you like to know about Jango Fett or Boba Fett? So like this. I don't like to repeat everything to you if I don't have to. So let's give that a run and see how that goes. So in this case, the only example I have right now that I think is going to work for a person is the word fat again. So we'll try that and see if we get the right response. Alexa, ask unofficial Star Wars about Fett.
You asked me about Fat, and I found multiple answers. Would you like to know about Jango Fett or Boba Fett? Would you like to know about Jango Fett or Boba Fett?
Boba Fett. Stop. So she was waiting for a response because we didn't actually say anything, right? I do this response ready, but what I didn't do is actually do anything when we actually have the right response, like when we know we're going to just have one value. And what we're going to get that one value from is our tables of data. So this is where we're going to actually start making some HTTPS calls out to the web and get the things that we actually need. So I'm going to open up my person table just to take a look at it and make sure that I know like the field names and stuff like that. This should be coming along any minute. Okay, so I have my nice long table of data here. I have my images. So we'll see all that here in just a moment. Perfect. And so this is what my data set's going to look like, and I'm going to make a call in and just get one individual record. So in order to do this, I'll start with their API. The API for Airtable is fantastic, and if you come into the person table, it will show you actual data as you go through all of these things. So if I come into person table, you can see that it recognizes all the fields that I have. So the field name will have data that looks like these. You can see this is actual live data of my own. For image, what's really cool about this is that it will provide me with an entire data set of information about my images. Not only the original image that I uploaded, which I get the full path for, but it also gives me thumbnails for a large and a small version of that image as well. It also tells me file size. So there's lots of really nice beneficial uses to having your image directly in your table. That's not a best practice I've ever encountered in building data sets, is to put your images right in your data table. But in this case, especially when you're working with a team of people that might not be as technical or don't want to go through the process of FTPing an image up to some server someplace and then getting the path of that image and then pasting that into here, sometimes it's just easier to slap the image right in here. And then we have all of those references and everything that we need right here. So I have my images, my voice description, my screen description. You can see that it's just pulling sample data for all of it. But if I want to look at their API, like they actually have an SDK that you can use inside your code. I'm not using that today, but you can see here that you actually provide your API key and the base that you're looking at, and then you can go in and grab a specific record. The problem with this, at least with their SDK, is that it requires me to use a unique identifier that is applied to every row of their table, and I don't know that yet. All I know is that they want to know about Han Solo or they want to know about R2-D2, and so I'd almost have to make two calls in that manner. One to find out what the do a full list and figure out which one Han Solo is, and then I would have to figure out what his unique identifier is, and then make a second call to do that. Way too much work. But what's really nice in all of this is that if I come into my person table and I come down here to the ends of my fields, it says these parameters need to be URL encoded, and they actually provide this really nice resource at CodePen that will allow me to build out a URL encoder for an encoded URL, that points directly to my data. So they already have my base ID, they already have my table name, and I can come in and add things like filters, how many records I want, page size, and then it generates this really nice URL encoded string that I can use to access this. So I've already made the leap way past like how do I construct a URL just to save us some time today. So what I've done initially, just so that we can access our data, is I'm going to be making standard HTTPS calls directly against my data. And the way that I'm going to do that is by using a URL like this, and I'm going to specify a filter. So I'm going to say that the name field here, I'm going to be matching on my name field. So I'll pass it Luke Skywalker, saying that name equals Luke Skywalker, and it'll return the whole value to me. So I'm using some string encoding to do it instead of using their SDK. But their SDK is fantastic, and if it meets your purposes, by all means use it. So let's go back to my code, which is here, and let's do some stuff, like I say. So the first thing that I need to do is determine that filter string. I need to take the thing that you said, and I need to create a part of the encoded string that's going to be the filter. So again, we're not really learning anything here. I just want you to know that that's what I'm doing here. Is I have their formatting, filter by formula. You can see that the word name is encoded in here, and then I'm actually encoding the URI component, and this is where I take resolve value 0, the only value that I got because I'm in this condition, .value.name, and I'm just going to use that as the value that I pass into the database, because that should be one of my slot values, which perfectly matches all of my data values, so I can count on it finding a record. So that's my filter string. The next thing that I need to do, though, is start making my HTTPS request. If you guys have done any kind of asynchronous coding in JavaScript before, you know that it's a little tricky, and that you kind of have to, once you start making your HTTP call, you kind of have to live in there the rest of the way. So I have one other function that we use as part of our cookbook that I've renamed and tweaked a little bit, so I'll explain what I changed. But we call it HTTPS get. And all it does is you specify a place that you want to go. It chunks that data back to you, and then once it's all been consolidated and ended, then it returns all that data to your function. So in here, that's what I have. And you can see that I have one called Airtable get. And I'm passing in a few values because I want to be able to reuse this function. So base is the base that I'm using. So we were looking at this. If I come out here to the Airtable API, for each of my tables, you can see that I have a base ID. So that this one is that one. If I were to come into Droid and look at this same thing, you can see that whenever this loads, just to let you guys know, my internet is incredibly slow when I'm also streaming. So that's why some of these pages take a little while to load. But if I open up the node page for this, you can see that the base ID for the Droid table is slightly different. So I'm going to need to be able to pass that in every single time. So I have a base. I have the name of the table. You can see in this case that if I go back to person, my table name is named person also, which is this thing here. I could have multiple tables across this, like tabs in a spreadsheet, I suppose. But so that's my person table. So you can see here that I would pass the base ID and the table, and then that filter string that I just created. And then, of course, the callback function. That's where all this stuff is going to happen, which is up above. So we'll do that up above. But in here, I console log all those values just to make sure I know what I'm getting. And then I call out to their API, and I use this path where I add in the base and the table and the filter. And then this chunk here is unchanged, but it's really just going out, getting the values that I need, and bringing them back in chunk style until I have all of them, and then it responds back to my function. So up here, since I now have a function called Airtable get, I'm going to come up here and I'm going to call that function. So let's start by calling, where did my line go? Airtable get, and in here are those 4 values that I need to pass. So the first one was the base ID. So let's go get that wherever it was. Stop. So if I look at my API for the people table, which is the person table, which is the one that I want, I'll grab that app ID. Actually, I have it over here in some notes. So I'll take that, and we can come back here and pass that as my first value. So that is the name of my base. And then secondarily, I need the name of my table, which is person. Third is going to be my filter value that I just created up above. And then finally, I need my callback function, which we're going to call the results record. I did type that wrong. We want a parentheses record. And this is where you use the little arrow, and I'm going to define a function that we're going to interact with here. So put my semicolon on the end, and then inside here, all I'm assuming is that we are now making a call out to that specific table. We're getting a record back, and now everything that happens inside here is what I do with that record. So the first thing that I would always do is console.log this, and I would say air table record, equals, and I would, because it's going to be JSON, I want to break it out of that. So JSON.stringify. And in here, I'm just going to say record. So all I've done on that first line is write that out to my log so that I have it. The next step that I need to do is start crafting my speech text, which is the thing that Alexa will actually say. So with that, I'm going to say...
If you want me to repeat something you said,
Alexa,
say Simon said...
Stop. So to do this, I'm going to... How should I best do this? I'll create a variable called speech text. And it's going to say something like, again, we've done this a couple of times already, right? You asked me about, how am I doing on time? You asked me about, and this is where I'm going to give this spoken value. You asked me about spoken value, so this would be fat or whatever. But then I'm going to actually tell them what I found. So I'll, in here, I'm going to add a little break because I like a little bit more break than she would give with just a period. So break time is half a second. And once I have that, then the last piece that I want to add on here is the voice description. So if we remember what our data looks like, in here, you can see that I have this voice description, which is actually a nice paragraph about the character that you asked about. So in this case, I'm going to say record.records, and because there is a bunch of stuff in there, I'm going to say 0, because there could be multiple records that came back, although there is not for what I'm doing. Fields and voice description. And so what I'll do in a second when I run this is I'll show you what the JSON looks like that came back as our record. So I have that. The other thing that I probably want to do is add a question after that whole voice description. So I could do a get random question here at the end. Just do this and that. That gives me my get random question. And then I need to do I need to actually create my speak module. So this.response.speak. And in here I'm just going to have speech text. And then it's a lot to read a second time. So I think what I'm going to do is .listen, and I'm just going to do get random question. So that should give me this.response.speak, where I have my speech text, which is what I just created. And then the last bit is the response ready, which we will catch on the line below. So I have, oh, you know what, I can't do that here because I'm inside that that other function. So this works really nicely for the other two, but we will be out, that won't be in scope. So we'll do this Airtable get, and we'll do all of our response right here. So what this should do is make a call directly out to our table. It should get the appropriate record, and then it should say, you asked me about whoever I asked about, and then give me a nice voice description about that person. And when it's done, it should also get a random question. I want to check and make sure that there's some spacing on get random question when it submits its answer. So get random question is up here a little bit, and I'm putting a half-second break before the question. So that means that even if I stack it right on the end of the description, I'll still have a little pause there. That's perfect. So let me save that, and we'll give this a run. Right here's we run out of time. So Alexa, ask unofficial Star Wars about Boba Fett. Alexa, stop. All right, let's try that again. Alexa, ask unofficial Star Wars about Fett.
You asked me about Fat, and I found multiple answers. Would you like to know about Jango Fett or Boba Fett?
Boba Fett. not getting an appropriate response. So let's take a look at my logs, because something is happening here, and it's not super clear to me. So let's open my most recent logs and see what's happening. So you can see in here that we're actually, let me start with event. It heard me say Boba Fett. It matched it to Boba Fett here. So I'm getting this appropriate response. And then this is where I'm in my Airtable get, and I'm recognizing the base and the person and all that path. And then I have my data come back. This is what the data that comes back from Airtable looks like. So you can see that I have my fields.name and all that stuff looks good. I have my actual Airtable record there, and then I feel like something's breaking. Or at least there's no response happening. So let me go back into my code and just see what I did wrong there, because this should all be working. I know what will easily fix it, but I was hoping to have a better response. So what I'm going to do is take this line out. I think it's hitting this before we want it to. So I'll do it in the individual functions each time. So let's give that a try and see if that doesn't solve my problem. And if it doesn't, then I've got a little more investigation to do. Alexa, ask unofficial Star Wars about Fett.
You asked me about Fett, and I found multiple answers. Would you like to know about Jango Fett or Boba Fett?
Boba Fett.
You asked me about Boba Fett. With his customized Mandalorian armor, deadly weaponry, and silent demeanor, Boba Fett was one of the most feared bounty hunters in the galaxy. A genetic clone of his father, bounty hunter Jango Fett, Boba learned combat and martial skills from a young age. Over the course of his career, which included contracts for the Empire and the criminal underworld, he became a legend. What do you want to know?
Stop.
Goodbye.
So there you go. So we've not written a ton of code, but in here you can see that we're checking our resolve values for its length. And when we do have a length of 1, then we can be confident to go out and do some stuff, which is retrieve the record from our database, give the user a response, and go. If we have more than one response, we do a simple clarification to say, hey, which one did you actually want? And if they didn't have a match at all, then we say, hey, here's what I heard you say, but I don't know what to do with that. And so you can see in each of these situations, we're still putting the power back into the hands of the user. We can say, hey, here's what you said, but we don't really know what to do with that. Or here's the answer you wanted, or hey, I have multiple possibilities for you. Which one would you like to use? And so in each of these cases, we're going to take this same kind of situation, this chunk of code that we've just written here, which is just 20 lines or so, and we're going to apply that again to our location and our weapon and everything else. So I'm not going to go through that now. We are just at the top of our hour, but I want to make sure that you guys understand kind of what goes into this. And I'm going to go ahead behind the scenes after we're done, and I'll apply that to each of the other ones. And then for next week, we are going to have quite a surprise. I can't talk about it yet, but there's some interesting stuff that we'll be able to talk about on our next meeting next Wednesday, I believe, and we'll go through that process as well. So thank you all for attending. I hope you learned something interesting, and we will see you again next week.